Both Microsoft and Sony surprised us with the near-simultaneous announcement of the first two official 9th-gen titles, Hellblade II on Xbox Series X and Godfall on the PS5. We got very little to work with in both cases, and footage is especially scarce for Godfall. We saw barely 1 minute of what described as in-engine footage. This doesn't necessarily reflect on the final quality of the game's visuals, but it does give us a decent idea of what's possible on that console and with that engine. The Godfall announcement teaser is the very first PS5 footage we're getting our hands on, and while the usual caveats apply, it is, after all, a 1-minute canned trailer. There are some interesting highlights worth taking a closer look at. We're gonna go ahead and do that now. High-resolution volumetric effects. Right off the bat, the first thing you notice about Godfall is the rich, thick layer of volumetrics in the first scene. We see external light illuminating volumetric fog inside the building. The fog itself blends well around the edges and appears to be full resolution. This is a key difference from 8th-gen implementations. A common shortcut developers took in the 8th-gen was lowering the resolution of volumetric effects. Because volumetrics are by definition hazy, half-res or even quarter-res volumetrics don't glaringly stand out. The high-quality implementation we see in Godfall, though, is reminiscent of CGI. Accurate global illumination. Indirect lighting is something of a bugbear this generation. Games either have an expensive GI implementation or a cheap but low accuracy variant. Metro Exodus and Just Cause 4 fall at opposite ends of this spectrum. In Godfall, the PS5's additional GPU resources appear to be enough to deliver high-quality GI. During a blue magic explosion, diffuse lights glint off reflective surfaces and subtly tints others. Extensive use of dynamic shadows. Dynamic shadows hit both the CPU and GPU pretty hard. In the 8th gen, aggressive shadow culling was a common optimization technique used to give the illusion of numerous shadow casters, while managing the number of shadows on screen at a time. Debris shadows in particular were culled aggressively or omitted entirely. Another shortcut was to use heavy-handed ambient occlusion that would stand in for actual well-defined shadows. This is why we're particularly impressed with the scene in Godfall where the trailer's protagonist lies in a puddle of water. All the bits of debris around him, even pieces half the size of his fingers, receive proper shadowing. Shadow resolution and filtering are of a very high quality, so there's little in the way of shimmer or other artifacts. Improved textures and material quality. One of the PS4's biggest drawbacks vis-a-vis the Xbox One X was a lack of VRAM. The PS4 Pro gave developers only 512 megabytes of extra VRAM to work with compared to the PS4. Factoring in system RAM requirements, this meant that as little as 3.5 to 4 gigs of VRAM is actually available to the Pro, nowhere near enough to load high-resolution texture assets. In multi-platform games, this meant the PS4 Pro often loaded in lower-resolution texture assets, even in cases where it matched the Xbox One X in terms of resolution. One thing we can say confidently is that the PS5 will feature a substantially larger pool of memory. There's no telling how large, but a 16GB to 24GB shared pool isn't out of the question. With that much video memory available, it's easy for the PS5 to deliver high-quality textures that do justice to 4K displays. This is something we see in full effect in the Godfall trailer. The main character's armor is covered in incredibly detailed texture work. We're looking at 4K or higher texture assets across the board. Small, high-frequency details like fine scratches in the armor are visible. High texture quality is paired with enhanced material rendering. Physically based rendering doesn't exactly incur a performance penalty. There are instances of the technique being used on 7th gen hardware and mobile. It did, however, take years for the technique to go from PhD research paper to a standard part of the material rendering pipeline in commonly used engines like Unreal 4. By the time the PS5 releases, physically based materials will be a standard feature, even in games with stylized art styles. We see the use of high-quality physically based materials in Godfall. What's immediately noticeable is the quality of metal surfaces, with the main character's armor exuding an accurate metallic sheen. Other surfaces are depicted convincingly as well. Dense particle rendering. It's always been a challenge to scale particle effect quality. The more particles you have on screen at a time, the more CPU draw calls and the greater GPU utilization as well. This means that developers have had to resort to shortcuts like particle culling and lowering the overall number of particles on screen to hit 8th gen performance targets. With Godfall, this appears to not be the case. Particle effects play exuberantly across the screen. In scenes with environmental destruction, dense particle volumes are paired with volumetric lighting to really add to the atmosphere. In other scenes, for example when a flaming sword is pulled out, we see a very high density of particles being rendered on screen at once. Particle transparency effects are particularly impressive. Another commonly used 8th gen optimization is to use half or quarter res alpha transparencies. Transparent particle effects like the flames surrounding the character's sword appear to be rendered at full res. Extensive use of post-process effects. When it comes to post-process effects, what we're seeing in Godfall is an evolution and refinement of the 8th gen post-process feature set. Bloom lighting, depth of field, motion blur, and temporal anti-aliasing are all in place, and all very refined. Godfall takes place in a fantasy setting, and bloom is used extensively to enhance the art direction. Bloom is liberally applied to a whole range of light sources, from glowing eyes to braziers and magic effects. We have a high-quality bokeh depth of field effect in place, with minimal haloing around objects in focus. Both per object and camera motion blur are utilized. We're especially impressed by the high-quality temporal anti-aliasing being used in the demo. The TAA filter here offers very thorough coverage. Transparencies in geometry receive thorough coverage, and we see minimal artifacting, with excellent temporal stability throughout the demo. Sharpness was also not an issue. Many modern titles add contrast adaptive sharpening to offset TAA blur, and that works just fine here. Conclusion. We had very little to go on with the Godfall trailer. This was, again, a mere 1-minute engine demo showcasing the broad capabilities of the PS5. The final game could change substantially, both in terms of its character as a looter slasher and in terms of its graphical feature set. So far, what we've seen both in Godfall and Hellblade II is an evolution and gradual refinement of techniques first implemented in 8th gen titles. The GPUs powering both 9th gen consoles support hardware ray tracing. We're excited to see more 9th gen footage in the months to come, as developers implement features that weren't possible at all earlier.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.